Hello, this is Isis,
and Nicole,
and welcome to another episode of Tea Talks,
where we talk about whatever we want
over cups of tea.
In this episode, we're going to talk about the myth of the Mothman from Point Pleasant, West Virginia.
And we are drinking black tea with milk and sugar.
Okay, so Point Pleasant is a very small town. It's about 3 miles long end to end with a population of less than 5,000 people, and most of those people have their families have been there for a very long time.
The TNT plant has been there since about the 1940s, since like the World War II.
And that is where most of the sightings of the Mothman occurred in the 60s. It's on a land that's more than 8,000 acres across, and for a long time it was a dumping ground for waste and toxins before it became a wildlife preserve.
Yeah, so the thing is that the Mothman has been sighted in Point Pleasant for many years, and during the most popular of its times, it lasted 13 months, starting in 1966. But there's been like sightings of a birdman or like something similar to the Mothman since like pretty much the 1914s. I'm sure even before that, but it's kind of hard to keep records of weird winged creatures. I'm guessing, right? We don't really know. Anyway, so we're gonna talk about a few of those sightings and then some of our thoughts about this famous Mothman. So, the first sighting we have is again, it happened in 1966. The first like really popular one that started the whole Mothman hysteria. And it's there was this National Guardsman at the armory, and he claimed to see the brown half-bird, half-man figure perched in a tree. And then like 2 weeks later, they saw the Birdman again at the TNT factory. So that's why we were talking about the TNT factory, because it's like the main place where you would see it, and it's, I believe, along this road by the Ohio River.
Yeah, and another really that's sighting that said again and again is about these group of men, the workers who were there late one night digging a grave, and they looked up and they saw the Mothman, and they described it as a very big creature with large wings and red eyes that just, I guess, flew away when they saw it. And another one is a group of kids. Well, they weren't kids, they were 2 young married couples, and they were just exploring the woods because it was a very popular area where teens would go to drag race and make out. And they went there and they saw the Mothman, and it chased them, from what they claim.
Yeah, apparently it has chased people that were driving at like up to like 100 miles an hour. And he, like the Mothman, has kept up, like flying above the car or like beside the car and just like terrifying these people. And I don't think it's ever like stopped. Like, you know, like there's all these accounts of the Mothman flying above the car, beside the car, like super fast. But then what does it do? They just like escape it every time. So you don't really know like what are his intentions. Like, why is he just chasing these people off? Is it just because, like, they're driving down his road and it's, like, his road? He just doesn't want anyone bugging him.
Around this time with the Mothman sightings, there is a huge breakout of UFO sightings too, where they would just see an object that they couldn't explain, but they would say it's a UFO, not the Mothman, but it happened a lot in the same area with the same people.
Yeah, and then there was Men in Black who would show up to visit all these people that claimed they saw the Mothman and tell them to stop spreading the panic, because like they wanted to like cover it up, but people had no idea who those people worked for. Like where did they come from? But yeah, there was a lot of UFO sightings and Mothman sightings all over town. They even got like the local authorities involved. I think they even got the state authorities involved. There were news articles written about it, and it was like a whole big thing because they kept seeing him and seeing him. So, I mean, if it was just like 1 or 2 cases, maybe it would have been easier to shut it down, but there was a lot of them.
There was actually over 100 sightings by the time it kind of calmed down. And there was actually, I don't remember the woman's name, but there was a reporter who came in, and she would have a weekly paranormal sighting article just featuring Point Pleasant and the surrounding neighborhood, because there were so many. And it became like a sport to the town, where they would just grab their guns and go up to the TNT factory to see if they could shoot the Mothman. And cause
that seems like a really southern thing to do.
Yeah, because that was like their main thought was like, oh, can we go shoot it? Like that was their first thought.
Of course. Let's shoot this alien. Oh, I feel bad for the Mothman. But anyway, I think we should give a description more in depth about this Mothman. Okay. So from what I gathered in all my research, I saw that what everybody can usually agree on is that he had really large wings of, I think I read up to like 10 feet wide, and like red eyes, even though some people say that his eyes weren't really red, it was just like the glowing of like the lamppost or something. Like some people were saying that he had like feathers all over, and he was like gray and like palish, and his head is kind of like hunched into his neck and kind of like,
yeah, as if he doesn't have a neck.
Yeah,
that's what people said. And
he is shown as like flying upwards like a helicopter, and some people say they hear the flapping of the wings, and some people don't. There's a lot of variations, but usually it's just that the big red eyes and wings.
Some say just his presence was just curious, he didn't want to harm them, while some thought he was a true evil who really wanted to hurt them. And they could just feel that from his presence.
Well, there was also this incident where, I don't know if you want to talk about it, the dog that went missing, which I think is the saddest one.
Well, that one to me was confusing because they felt they had to include it into the documentary we watched. But
this documentary is The Mothman of Point Pleasant.
Yes.
And it was really good.
And his name was Merle Partridge. And he and his wife were just in the living room at night. And they were watching TV when suddenly it just started screaming, and like the screen ran out, and as he got up to go look at what was wrong, it like blew up the TV, and the dog was barking really loud, and he ran outside. And so he followed his dog, and you could hear him barking, but he just ran into the woods, and he wouldn't come back whenever he called him. And he looked to the woods, and he just saw these red lights, but he said they were not eyes. Like, he specifically said these lights were not eyes, and that there was many of them, and they were just going around in weird circles.
Yeah, kind of like orbs.
Yeah, and they never found the dog.
I know. That is so tragic. That's the most tragic story of them all. And I have no idea if it has anything to do with the Mothman, but I think it's like important because it happened right during the Mothman sightings.
And I think they lived right down from the TNT factory.
Yeah.
They lived right there on that road.
But apparently, so the sightings were really popular, and this went on to lead to the Silver Bridge collapse, which happened on December 15, 1967. And it basically just collapsed, dumped half of the cars into the river, and then the bridge fell on them, and people just froze and died. And it was really tragic for the whole town. I mean, before this happened, there was a lot of like really bad things happening. Like the river had flooded before, and people had lost their homes and stuff. So the town has faced a lot of bad luck, but that was like the worst thing because like so many people died, and people from Ohio and West Virginia. So after that, like nobody wanted to talk about the Mothman again. It just kind of like went away because they were still dealing with that. But apparently the book that was published, The Mothman Prophecies in 1975, kind of brought everything back and gave it more publicity, and that's why we are talking about this today, because like it's so popular up to this day. And not just the book, but the movie that came after that, I think it was in 2003, The Mothman Prophecies. It brought everything back to light, and I'm pretty sure there's still a lot of Mothman sightings, not just in Point Pleasant, but like all over the world. And it's just something that's like talked about. I think the town is mostly known for that, and they've kind of embraced it because they have a festival now, a Mothman festival, and a Mothman museum, and it's kind of like their thing. They have like a big statue of the Mothman there. So
their diners have like Mothman meals that was named after them, so it's a big money bringer for the town, where they get a lot of people visiting and everything. They also have a museum just dedicated to the Mothman too.
And there are a lot of theories that kind of debunk whether the Mothman was real or not. And I don't know if you want to get into those things, because I think they're pretty exciting. I had no idea that there were theories about this, because I had always just bought into the idea of the Mothman being real. Just blindly. I might not believe in like all these other like myths and legends, but I believed in the Mothman wholeheartedly. So, and now that you brought these things that could be very real, I'm like, maybe there's a chance he wasn't so real.
Well, some of them were boring explanations, were like, well, maybe it was just a plane and they were confused, and or maybe a man with wings. I don't know why that's like a genuine theory, but a lot of people say it was just a prank from a man who was dressed in a costume, but they couldn't figure out how like he flew around and stuff. And some people say that construction workers made a balloon out of a large plastic sheet and filled it with helium and put red flashlights on it, which doesn't make sense to me either.
So elaborate for like that.
Yes. Some say it was an alien because of the Men in Black and the UFO sightings. Some say it's an angel that predicted disaster because I think like they have a picture of the Mothman on the bridge right before it collapsed, and I guess it came out a lot of times. It was seen a lot of times before a major disaster struck.
Yeah, so people do see it like an omen. I think that's what the Mothman prophecies was trying to get at too, that it was like some kind of omen, and I don't know if I'm mixing this up, but didn't it like give people a warning like over the phone? Didn't it like pretend to be like family members calling them from like...
Well, I think like I never saw that in my actual research, like,
but in the
it wasn't
movie,
in the documentary, but it was in the movie,
the Mothman prophecy.
So I don't know, and people say that was a lot like fictionalized, not taken from the actual book, which was based a lot on research. But I know he did mess with radios, but I don't know if he spoke.
Yeah, the Mothman actually messed with the radios of the sheriffs. Some of them, like the sheriff and his deputies, like that showed up after the I think one of these cases when they called them, and they could not find him. Like he never showed up. Like the Mothman never was there whenever the authorities showed up. But like when they turned on the radio, then they could hear some screeching or something.
Some believe that it was just a common barn owl because while it's little, like whenever it spreads its wings, it actually is 10 feet wingspan, just like the Mothman was said to, and that they could have been flying by the cars, and people were just, I guess, already scared and mistaked it. Some said that it was actually a sandhill crane that migrated from Canada. And some say that it was like
they
some sort of
nothing like
yeah,
the
it doesn't. But some people say because the TNT plant was toxic and everything, that a bird could have been mutated, and that's what happened, and that's what they were seeing.
That's a very interesting theory. I think that this case, this sighting, really made me believe that it could have been some kind of person dressed in some costume, because even though it was terrifying at first, okay, so it's this family, they went to visit some other family in Point Pleasant, and they were like, oh, maybe we'll get to see the Mothman, like kind of jokingly, and then when they were leaving, this is around the 60s, the mid-60s, when this was happening, they were getting into their car, and apparently this woman who was just about to open her car, she saw the Mothman just a few feet from her, and he was all like full of feathers and whatever, and she was so sure that he was going to sweep her up and like just fly away with her. And so she fell back. She fell on top of her daughter, and her husband he saw the whole thing, and he ran up to them, and then they went back inside the house. But apparently the Mothman didn't just leave. He was like on the front porch, and he was just like pushing on the door and looking into the window. That sounds to me like some kind of stalker, like using all of this to like just mess with people. And I mean, I never thought that this Mothman could get that far and just like lurk around. And he was gone by the time the authorities showed up, as always, but that kind of makes sense if you think about that theory.
Though a lot of authorities said that a lot of the witnesses were credible, so they weren't sure what to believe.
That's right. But a lot of it was said that many of these sightings could have been by like people that were just drunk or on drugs because they just couldn't believe that it had been real.
Yeah. One theory that has been debunked, but I thought was interesting because people just love Native American curses for some reason, and they love to believe that land is cursed by them. But there was a battle in Point Pleasant where they invited Chief Cornstalk. That's not his actual name, but I guess that's what it translates into in English. And they invited him to a peace conference to discuss a treaty so there would be no more fighting. And whenever he came, they shot him multiple times in the chest. And it was said for years that he cursed the land to bring nothing but death and destruction upon them in revenge for killing him that way.
And stealing his land.
Yes, and people really loved that theory, but whenever people started to dig into the myth, they discovered that years ago there was a play that showed this scene, and they just added him speaking like that while he was dying for effect, for dramatic effect. Because, if you're shot multiple times in the chest, like, you're not going to have this whole dramatic speech.
Exactly.
But people really like that one because I forgot to mention about the myth of the Thunderbird, which Native Americans talked about a lot. And they would talk about this big man bird that looked very similar to the Mothman, and around the area, and they had pictures that looked very similar, and they're like, see, maybe it was around for a lot longer than we thought. But,
Yeah, and even recently I found that in 2016 there was this anonymous man who captured images of the Mothman. I think around in Point Pleasant, around that area, and he presented them to the local news, and they're very grainy, and they just show a silhouette of the Mothman kind of flying around the treetops. But people also think that this person just created those images because it was like the 50th anniversary, if you count it from like the 1966 sightings. So, I mean, that could also be possible.
John Keel, the actual author of the best-selling book,
The Mothman Prophecies?
Yes. He actually believes that the area is a window area, where I guess the layers between dimensions are very thin, and so the supernatural can actually cross over into our world, and that's why they have so many sightings and everything. And actually a lot of people believe in that theory. Like, that's a very popular.
Yeah. I mean, I really like that theory too. But I am really like interested in all these theories that it could just all be an elaborate prank.
Yes, because I saved this one because I think it's the most interesting one with this hoax, is because this guy called Gray Barker, he was very known for exploiting the paranormal for money, and he was one of the first people to really bring the Mothman to national attention, and he was also a known associate of John Keel. And while many believe that John Keel really believed in the Mothman, they think that Mr. Barker could have deliberately misled him in order to really stir the pot and cause ruckus.
And now look how famous the Mothman prophecies became, and look how much everybody's talking about the Mothman. I mean, it all could tie in together, but it could all just be true, and maybe there is a giant Mothman out there in Point Pleasant who is now spotted all over the world. You never know. But all of this started because I read an amazing story. Okay. It was a fan fiction called Point Pleasant, and it later became a book by Jan Archer Woods, and she was one of my friends. That's the only reason I got to know about this Mothman, and I was so fascinated by it. I just had to keep like digging because he's so like fascinating. Like I still have no idea what to make of it. And in the book, there's a lot of differences. Like, I mean, it doesn't acknowledge that the town has all this history with the Mothman. She kind of just made her own history about it. She did have like the voices in the radio, and in the book, spoiler alert, but the Mothman is an angel, and there's another one who's a demon. So she kind of went that route, but I mean, I just wanted to mention it because I don't think we would be talking about the Mothman if it wasn't for that story, which I know you don't really like, but I loved it. And I've read it for so many years, and I kind of reread it recently just to prepare for this, but I didn't get anything out of it anymore. I think I read it at least like 5 or 6 times. So I think it's interesting if you want to read anything else about the Mothman, but it's not really accurate. I mean, I don't really know what the reality of this whole thing is, the Mothman, because there's a lot of different variations. So, what do you think the Mothman was?
I think, like any good explanation, there's multiple factors in it because like whenever I was watching the documentary about it, it really caught my attention that people would go there and a lot of toxic waste was there, but people would spend their time there, and I really thought that would affect them. And I know how human psychology is, so if like those couples, like, you know, they were high, so so I'm really curious of how, because it's a little town, and you know, people say you know everyone in this town, and I think if with the newspaper coming every week, like to do articles about them and people just talking about it constantly and going up there for sport and everything, like I think it really could spread into each other's minds, because I remember this one incident from my childhood, because I was in Girl Scouts and we were camping in the woods, and in our troop, the Girl Scout leader had an older troop because her daughter was in our troop, and then she had an older daughter who also was in Girl Scouts, so we would do a lot of things together, and so we always did prank wars against each other. And we decided to really scare the older girls, so we would like scratch on their windows, and we're like, oh my god, we were like, okay, we're gonna see something in the woods. So we're like, okay. And one girl started it, and she was like, there's red eyes. And we were like, yeah, there's red eyes. And we were all just talking about like seeing this monster in the woods. And then suddenly it wasn't a prank anymore. Like, we really scared ourselves. Like, it really just caught on that there was actually something in those woods. You know? Like,
yeah.
So it just becomes a really big thing.
Wow.
So I really...
That's a good point.
think that's a good cause for why there were so many sightings. And people can really believe it. You know, so they can seem credible even when they're not.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think I hadn't considered that either, but all these people knew each other, and maybe if like one of them like believed that the other person would never like make something like that up, so it would be easier to believe, and then somebody else would see it and like another credible person and stuff. But I mean, I also think that if you put the Mothman and the UFOs and the Men in Black and all these other things together, it's kind of hard to fake the whole thing all together. So
especially with those photographs,
yeah,
where I don't think anyone disproved them.
No.
So it's always interesting to believe that there are other creatures and stuff out there.
I don't
So
think it's an angel, though. I don't think angels look
so.
like that. I'm just saying.
But I always want to believe.
I want to believe like Mulder and Scully. Well, Scully doesn't believe anything. Yeah. I feel the same way. I want to believe the Mothman is real. But also, I was thinking, like, if something like that were to happen nowadays, and if it happened, like, here in our town, in Texas, like,
I don't think it would go to that extent. Well, plus, I find it hard to believe even with the internet and modern technology and everything, anything like that could happen. Because, you know, like, the 60s didn't have anything to do. Or, like, how to fact check anything. So, things can easily be debunked and explained nowadays. And people just aren't that interested in it. And, like, conspiracies like that anymore.
well, I still am.
Not to where you would actually believe it. Like, people would talk about it as in gossip.
Yeah.
And they would think it's interesting, but I don't think a lot of people would really believe it. But also, I'm not sure if the people of Point Pleasant of today really believe it, or if they're just cashing in on it.
Maybe.
It's interesting.
The guy that, like, started, like, the museum in 2005, I believe, I know he's been there for a long time, and he seemed to believe all of that. He has all these records and, like, images and stuff in his museum, and, like, he started it because he was so passionate about it. And I think he just finds it cool that, you know, his town had this, like, big Mothman sighting, like, happening. And I don't know, I feel like maybe not all the townspeople would agree with him, but I think a lot of them do. And I'm pretty sure they're not, like, unhappy about all the business they get, especially during the Mothman Festival and all that. I mean, I would be really excited to have all this, like, all these visitors coming, at least just, like, during a certain time of year and monetizing.
Yeah, well, the festival looks cool. I would definitely want to go one year when we can.
Me too. But I mostly just want to take a picture with that Mothman statue. It has, like, it's silver and it has, like, red eyes. It's really big, kind of creepy. It's perfect.
Go ahead.
So, yeah, I mean, I think in the end, it's really interesting to just, like, get to know more about this Mothman legend. But who knows? I mean, it's up to anyone who takes all this information and to decide if it's real or if it's not.
And as some said whenever I did my research, some things you just don't know about, and you're not going to know about, and you'll never know. And that's how
You'll
it
never
is.
know. So, good luck. Well, that was all we had for today, and I had a lot of fun talking about my Mothman. I call him my Mothman because I consider him a friend. Whether or not he's real, don't matter. I can have fictional friends. I have a lot, okay? I read books. But anyway, we'll see you next time. We won't see you next time. We'll hear you. You will hear us.
Bye.
Goodbye.